In every kitchen, there's a leader. A chef who commands the room, shapes the team, and sets the standard. Chef André isn't just a chef. He's a mentor, a creator, and a voice for the next generation of culinary artists. From the heat of the kitchen to the airwaves of his podcast, Chef André is redefining what it means to lead in today's culinary world. He's cooked for the elites, shaped future chefs, and shared wisdom that goes beyond the plate. And now, I sit with the man who created Chef's PSA, André Natera. Welcome to Chef Ismael's Kitchen Quest. So first off, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining this podcast. Today, I want to kind of dive into your path and your mindset, your Eastern philosophy and culinary influences, the success and the 48 laws of power, the abstract thinking and business, culinary history and evolution, the role of mentorship, some of your personal interest, and I have a couple fun questions for you, as well as the one controversial topic, which is the modern trends of fine dining. So with that being said, I think that I want our guests or viewers to know exactly who you are, what you're about. So if you want to go ahead and tell us who André Natera is, I'd be more than happy to share the platform for you.
Well, I'll tell you who the professional André Natera is. The person is much more complex than the professional, but the professional is, I was a chef. I guess maybe I'm still kind of a chef indirectly, as nowadays the term is used very loosely. But I was a chef in the profession for 27 years active, working in kitchens, being an executive chef since 2004. So during my career, I've worked in all types of places, from been an executive chef of a country club. I've been a corporate chef 2 times over for large hotel chains, regional corporate chef in one, corporate chef for another. I've been an executive chef / partner owner in a restaurant group as well in Dallas, Texas, where restaurants closed, and then I found myself looking for a job again. I've been most recently, my last job, I was the culinary director for the Fairmont Hotel in Austin, Texas, which was the largest Forbes travel guide 4-star hotel in the world. And they just got their Michelin key, as Michelin has started handing out keys for hotels. I've been, I have several awards. I sit on several boards and committees. I'm highly active in the culinary industry. After 27 years, I decided that I wanted to take a back step, or maybe not even a back step, just a lateral move into something different. And I decided to pursue Chef's PSA, which is what I do now. So Chef's PSA it's basically a media company that I run. It has a podcast. I've authored and published 6 books. Some that are a little bit more serious, some that are works of fiction, some are meant for self-help. I have the podcast, Chef's PSA. I run the social media channels as well. And I do a lot of consulting and public speaking and lectures and things of that sort, a lot of leadership seminars and whatnot. But really my biggest passion, and the reason I transitioned into this new endeavor, was I really wanted to bridge the gap between chefs and cooks and new cooks to become good cooks. So basically, in a nutshell, help chefs become better chefs, help cooks become chefs. And what I recognize that there's a lack of mentorship. There's an infinite amount of resources out there currently to help people cook, right? You go on YouTube and you could see thousands of videos to teach you how to cook fish, butcher meat. But there's not a lot of resources out there to help you become a better chef, or how to think like a chef, or to be transparent with you and tell you the things that are discussed behind the scenes, to let you know how chefs think, to let you know some of the unwritten rules of working in this industry. And when I realized that was one of the biggest obstacles that hold people back from success, I said, I'm going to help with that, because I am passionate about mentorship, and I am passionate about helping people become chefs. So that's when I decided to leave culinary after 27 years. I felt pretty good with what I had accomplished, and I recognized there was things that I still left on the table that I didn't accomplish. But in order to accomplish those things, I knew the sacrifice required. And I just said, you know what, I don't know if I want to do that because I'm more interested in this. I'm okay with leaving that behind and starting this new endeavor. So that's me in a nutshell as a professional.
No, that's awesome. So you've essentially have had an incredible 27 years cooking alongside some of the best chefs. How has that shaped your mindset from the very beginning all the way up until now?
Every time I'd work with a great chef, like you think you know, and then all of a sudden you work with a chef that's much more skilled than you or much better than you, and you realize you don't know. And every time I thought I was good, and then I'd work with someone good, I'd be like, okay, I have a lot more work to do. But the good thing about that is every time I did it, leveled up my game. You know, if I did it, even if it was just a dinner in tandem with another chef. So, for example, if I have a Michelin-starred chef coming in to do a guest chef dinner, and I'm seeing things that I've never seen before, even though I didn't work with them for more than a couple of days, just being in their presence and seeing some of the new techniques and the way that they thought, the way that they moved, I was able to absorb that into my own repertoire and incorporate that. So every time I work with someone better than me, I realize that it always benefited me net positive. So one of the things that I say in Chef's PSA is it's better to be the worst cook in a good kitchen than the best cook in a bad kitchen. And the reason I say that is that's from my own experience, is every time I leveled up, the people that were around me, my circle of influence, I leveled up as well. Even if I wasn't the best, I left there being better. And that's something that I would say I would encourage everyone to do as well, is put the ego aside. Your ego, and we all have ego. Some of us use our ego for good or bad, right? But if you could put the part of you that's insecure to the side, you will learn much more than if you're insecure about not being the best. So I would highly encourage people, work with people better than you, and you will get better. You can't be around sharks without becoming one yourself.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, man. So as far as discipline goes, so how do you apply discipline in both your culinary world or culinary work and your content creation, right? Is there like a daily ritual you implement when you're trying to stay focused?
Yeah. So in the kitchen, when I was executive chef, whenever I would start to structure the way kitchens were organized, I wanted to implement as much standardization and discipline as possible. So recipes are all spec'd out to the gram. There's no deviation. Everything is written. All the resources are there. How we fold the towel, how we cut the tape, how the uniform is presented, how we roll our apron, the way we greet each other, shake in and shake out. If I could have as much of that on autopilot, where you put your knife on your cutting board is at a 90-degree angle. How do we fold our towels 3x3? How do we cut the tape about that short, right? How do we initial date item? Where does it go? Right below the lip of the deli. So I wanted to standardize as much as possible so that the cooks didn't have to think about it. It just became autopilot. So the reason I did that is because, and again, talking about discipline, discipline sometimes has this negative connotation where it's like discipline means you're in trouble. It doesn't. It means doing the more difficult thing even when you don't want to do it, right? So the reason I had so much stuff disciplined, dialed in, and very specific is because when the cooks didn't have to think about that, when it became autopilot where everything went, this goes here, that goes there, we cut the fish this way, and everyone does it the exact same way, it left more room for creativity, more room for them to focus on things that were intentional. So there were no arbitrary decisions. Everything was made with intention to the best way that we could make it based on the collective intelligence of the group, which were a bunch of good chefs. So we'd all sit around and say, what's the best way to make pasta? We'd iterate it back and forth, and then we'd come to a solution and say, this is the best way to make pasta for our operation. Now let's make sure everyone does it that way, right? It doesn't mean that we don't know multiple ways to do it. It's just, this is the best way for our operation. Now, once everything's on autopilot and everyone does it the same way, now you can focus on the most important thing, which is making food delicious, right? Because you don't have to think about, well, what color of apron are they wearing? Why do they get to wear a cool t-shirt? Why do they get to wear fun socks? Why do they get to put their towels this way and I have to do it that way? No, you don't even think about that anymore because it's just autopilot, and you have this mental reserve. So what they call decision fatigue, right? So you don't have decision fatigue on all these decisions that are insignificant really to the end result. So you save that decision-making power for the most important things, which is making delicious food. Now, how do I incorporate this into content creation? So that was me as a chef, me as a content creator. I took a lot of that same idea of being structured and disciplined in my professional life, and then incorporated it into what I do day to day. And for example, I have a routine. I wake up, I do this, and I don't skip. So my morning routine is all intentional. It's all designed to make me a better version of myself. Do I get smarter, faster, stronger, etc. And then every day I sit down. The morning routine is long, so I won't bore you with it. But every day, once I get through all the other stuff like playing chess or reading or whatever, I'll start working. And what my work day looks like, once I get through all the other non-culinary related routine, I'll write. That's the first thing I do. So I write the chef's PSA. What is it going to be today? I create the images that go on the chef's PSA page, the little comic images. And I try to think, okay, if this is today's chef's PSA, and maybe it gets lost, like maybe they just don't fully understand what I'm saying here. Here's a little comic image to hopefully lift that up so they get the message with a real world situation. It doesn't always match up, because sometimes I'm just like, yeah, I think this is funny, so I'm going to put it up. But usually I try to make sure there's some correlation there, and then I'll write the narrative. I'll do some editing that gets posted. And then it's all the other things. It's respond to the DMs, make a reel, edit the podcast, create the thumbnails. Like, it's just all day. Like, I have my list, do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. What's funny is I probably work just as much now as I did when I was a chef. So I wake up, I start working, and I go to bed when I'm done working. Right? It's all work. There's no leisure time. And then on top of that, the only difference between now and then is now I don't get a day off. I work 7 days a week. So it's just a little bit different.
Yeah, no, for sure. You mentioned about how making pasta works for our operations. And the key word there is our. Because one thing that I've seen on your chef's PSA was it worked this way before, at my other kitchen and stuff like that. So I thought that was pretty funny. And then another thing too, in terms of the content creation, when I left the restaurant scene too, and trying to get my content going and trying to do this now and trying to get more and more done in terms of like the social media spaces, it really is a lot of work. And I always thought that it was just going to be like, okay, I was going to post this here and I'll get views, I'll get followers, and we'll see where that goes. But it's really more than that, dude, and I just felt that it was more like, I thought it was way more work than being a chef, just because you have to put more thought into it and more meaning to what you're trying to, what message you're trying to do. And just like I mentioned to you yesterday, I wish I knew about your page, because there were so many things that you mentioned in there in terms of your advice that I could have really implemented in my career. And I felt that I could have done so much better and so much more had I followed your guidance earlier on. But unfortunately, I found out after, I left the space, and now I'm doing my own private thing. But I put it up there because, and again, as I mentioned, I feel that your message is extremely important for new culinarians, those who want to go from cook to chef, or to sous chef to executive chef and beyond. And so, I just as you want to help people in that space, I also want to help them out, because you're right. There is a deficit in the mentorship aspect of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you're probably the only other one that I know that does mentorship, and I kind of do it, but not to the level you're doing it, because again, you're doing this every single day, whereas I'm talking about the history of chefs. I'm talking about, maybe sometimes I'll talk about the history of food or a specific type of cuisine. the book recommendations, and then I'll go into the words of the chef. And then I'll talk about essentially my personal experience as a chef and how I can help them out, and, learning from my mistakes. But at the end of the day, I mean, what you're doing is actually, very, very commendable. And I think that I honestly believe you should have way more followers than what you have right now.
I
But,
agree.
but I guess it's the long game, right? That matters. And if we continue to keep going, you're gonna just grow and grow and grow. Which is part of the reason why I was a little surprised that you said yes to joining me on my podcast, because I look at your resume, I look at your achievements, I look at what you're doing already, and I'm just like, I'm not worthy,
Well, you are. You don't know me well enough to say that, but trust me, you're totally worthy. You're totally worthy. What I would say this, like, people that follow Chef's PSA, and this does tie into the content creation, is that because I've seen a lot of pages kind of pop up that look similar to mine. And it's like, they saw mine. That's a good idea. We'll just copy that and do that.
Mhm.
It's a fun idea at first. When I first started Chef's PSA, I would put one up every week. And it was like on my personal page, Instagram story, something sarcastic. And then it became a couple of days a week, and then it became every single day. Now, when it was every week, I thought it was hard. I was like, what am I going to say today? It got even harder when it was a couple of days a week. And then now that it's every day, it's like, holy shit. Sorry, didn't mean to swear, but
No, you're good.
this is much harder than I thought. And with that being said, a lot of people say, oh, I could do that. Can you? It's easy when you only have to do 5. It's much different when now you're 3 years in and trying to come up with something witty every single day. They're not all bangers, right? Some of those Chef's PSAs, I read them later on, I'm like, I don't know what, that one sucked. And trust me, people let me know they sucked. Like, I don't agree with that one. It's like, you don't have to. They're not all for you. Some of them don't apply. Like, it's like that old Bruce Lee quote: apply what works, discard what doesn't. If it applies to you in your kitchen, in your situation, great, free advice. If it doesn't, great, keep scrolling. Right? It's not all intended for you. But I will say this, regardless, I mean, aside from Sunday brunch is completely sarcastic. But aside from my Sunday brunch quotes and some of them that are just intended to be cheeky, I would never put something up there that I don't think would be advice that I wouldn't give to someone I cared about. So I think people need to understand that. Like, I wouldn't put that up there, and I wouldn't say it if it wasn't advice that I would give to someone that I was mentoring as a mentee. So everything that I'm putting up there, I stand behind because I've either lived it or I've seen it lived by someone else. So I've experienced it. I've experienced the ups and downs of it, or I've experienced someone else going through the difficulty of it. So nothing that I'm putting up is anything, nothing I'm putting up is anything that is intended to hurt you in your career.
So you mentioned the Eastern philosophy resonates with you. And I wanted to, I guess, dive into that because I also love philosophy. And so I want to know who are your influences in Eastern philosophy are.
I would say the very first, well, I read a lot, so I should start with that. I read a lot of books. I used to read about a book a week, where now I've kind of slowed down a little bit because I had a retention problem. Like, reading more books doesn't mean you're retaining more. So I've slowed down so I can retain more. But with regards to books that I've read that I highly enjoy, the first one that I ever read that really got me hooked on Eastern philosophy, and I've probably read it about 30 times, is the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu's book, which I really found that one, like, just the style of writing, the way it's written, the way Eastern philosophy is typically communicated. Like, there's open-ended meanings. It can mean a lot of different things that are applicable to a lot of different times. The Chuan Tzu, which is another Eastern philosophy, I'm sure people have heard that, the butterfly dream allegory, that, am I dreaming that I'm a butterfly, or am I a butterfly dreaming that I'm Chuan Tzu? So I really like that one. I also enjoy The Art of War, Sun Tzu, Analects by Confucius. So those are some of the ones that I really enjoy. Even Indian philosophy, like the Bhagavad Gita, I'll read that as well. I just like how they're written in a style that is almost mystical and ambiguous. Like, what does this mean? So you'll see a lot of that in my writing with Chef's PSA, because I enjoy that style of writing. I enjoy reading that way. So I also like the open-endedness of it. Like it could mean a lot of different things to different people. So I try to incorporate that into a lot of the Chef's PSA posts. So that's the love for Eastern philosophy. Now, I wrote a book called Kitchen Art of War. And that was because of Sun Tzu's Art of War. And what I did with that book, which a lot of people don't get it, but I didn't write it for a lot of people. I really wrote it for like me. Like that's who I wrote it for. I wrote it for me because I was like, can I do this? I enjoy it. And what I did was I took the art of war and I went line by line and I translated it from a chef's perspective. I was like, what does this sentence mean to a chef? And so every single bullet point in Kitchen Art of War has a direct correlation to the equal and opposite point in Art of War from Sun Tzu. So I was like, oh, how does this apply to kitchens? So that way, a lot of people say this is like, okay, every businessman reads Art of War, every executive should read Art of War. It's like, okay, great, but how does that apply to real life? Yeah. Like you're reading something like burn all the enemies and surround them. It's like, okay, how do you apply that to the real world, right? So I was like, well, how would I apply this to the culinary world? So it's a literal translation, line by line, which I thought a lot of chefs could benefit from, especially if you like that style of writing, which I do, and if you like to be that deep thinker. It's not a book with training wheels. It's not a fun like, hey, sear the fish this way. It's not that type of book. It's like you got to contemplate on these lessons. You got to understand that style of writing, and you got to understand that I'm writing it as Sun Tzu would in that tone. So there's a lot of thou, thus versus hey, bro. So it's not a book with training wheels, but I hope I answered your question in a roundabout way.
No, you did. So that's very interesting that you mentioned that because The Art of War, when I first read that, I wasn't taking it literally, right? But it was I guess it's more of a social book for me, in my opinion, because I'm dealing with people in the corporate world. And so sometimes playing politics and using that book kind of helped me, Matt, gauge through the corporate maze. And it wasn't until I found out about 48 Laws of Power where I was like, this is like almost every single law applied to me. And in this setting, just because, again, I've made the mistake of law number 1, before.
The king.
Yeah. And it turned out horrible for me. That was a lesson that I learned the hard way. And never again did I ever outshine the master. But, there's other laws in there that I really enjoyed. Just, keep your mouth shut, listen more. And so that book definitely did help me climb the ranks up into the culinary world, just especially in the corporate world, right? Just because, and some people know this about me, but I used to work, at the happiest place on earth. With that being said, like, almost all of that had to pertain into that. So I know that you're a fan of 48 Laws of Power. So is there any particular laws that you find yourself leaning on either in business or in the kitchen?
I'm a huge fan of 48 Laws of Power. So I've read almost all of Robert Greene's books, including like Mastery and Art of Seduction. I'm trying to think what else he's written. But anyway, the 48 Laws of, or the 35 Laws of War, I don't remember, the 30 Laws of War, whatever it is, 33 Laws of War.
Yeah.
So I'm a big fan of Robert Greene and his writing style. I'm also a big fan of all the books that he's written. 48 Laws of Power for me is the most classic one of all of them, where I think it definitely applies to most life situations. One of the things that I don't think people understand is that, yes, times change and people move on and people don't behave that way. But the higher up you get to power structures, you realize that they do operate that way. And I've been very close to powerful people, CEOs and other influential figures, and you realize that the 48 Laws of Power are always being played out. And so while you might say that you might not think that way, I promise you, the human dynamic hasn't changed in the last few thousand years. Like the technology may have changed, but the emotions haven't. You know, you're still dealing with insecurity and jealousy and politics to a certain level. And the 48 laws of power, it all applies to life. I did a podcast series on Chef's PSA, which I think is the best podcast series I've ever done. And it's so good that I almost feel like insecure when I do new podcasts. It's like nothing, I can't top that. I did the Culinary 48 laws of power. And I went law by law, explaining how this applies to the kitchen. So similar to what I did with Art of War. Because I'm not saying you have to be Machiavellian in nature to succeed as a chef. But what I will say is the higher up you get in the power structure, you have to be able to recognize it. Because you might not be playing that game, but other people are. And if you're not aware of it, you will be taken advantage of. So I think you should arm yourself with knowledge and be prepared to chess move, counter move every single time. Whenever you're dealing with people, you're going to have to deal with this.
You've mentioned that you faced losing everything and then you ended up getting it all back.
Yeah.
Okay. How did that experience shape the way you think about success and resilience?
Well, when I had everything, so the first time around, I was a very successful chef. So I would say like from the years of 2010 to 2014, I was on top of the world. Every opportunity that could be given to me I was in every magazine, every publication, winning up any award that I was able to win. And I was on top of the world. I remember a couple of instances. Like I remember I went on vacation to Vancouver and a food writer went up to Vancouver to have lunch with me to write about my vacation. Like it was just like, it was kind of, some of the stuff was kind of weird. Someone introduced me at a party once like, oh, this is culinary royalty. So the reason I bring all that up is because I couldn't sneeze without someone writing about it for a few years. And what ended up happening is you start to believe your own BS, right? You start to think you're really this mega chef that walks on water. And so I started to drink the Kool-Aid that I was serving to myself, right? Mm-hmm. So the ego got bigger and bigger. I started to rub a lot of people that I cared about the wrong way. And it was something that I didn't think would ever happen to me because I thought I was pretty humble and, above it. I think a lot of people think they're above it until they find themselves in that situation. And if you're not prepared for success, success is a double-edged sword, right? It could really hurt you if you're not prepared for it. And so while all this is happening, I lost everything because just as quickly as my star rose was as quickly as they said, you know what, he's not as good as he used to be. Food sucks. Restaurants closing. It's like 4-star chef to 2-star chef. And I had this pretty quick downward spiral in my career. And it really hit me hard because I went through a period of reflection. I started to think, was I not a good chef? Like now I'm second guessing, like, because inside I'm like, I know I'm better than that. My restaurant shouldn't have closed. I shouldn't have had these failures. Why did this happen? I hurt a lot of people in the process that I cared about. And so as I look back on that period of time, the next few years after that, I laid low. I avoided the media. I avoided food critics. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I just kind of like stuck my head in the sand and disappeared. I was still working, but I wasn't trying to be a public figure anymore. And during that time, what I ended up doing during that reflection is this is kind of like the embryonic stages of Chef's PSA, is I realized that the times that I was successful and the times that I wasn't successful is where I was most successful. It was all about the culture. Happy cooks make good food, right? Very simple, right? And the places where I wasn't successful, when I had, kind of this slippery slope down, it was because I was that toxic chef, right? So when I was the chef mentor that really helped develop people, I was successful. When I became the egocentric toxic chef, the poster boy for that, I also failed and I lost everything. And it was terrible, right? I had worked at that point, let's say 22 years of my life to build up something to only have it lost within a few months, right? It was very difficult. So after a few years of reflection, I realized that this was the issue. The issue was, as much as I tried to look outward and blame someone else, because it was really easy to think it wasn't me, it was them. It wasn't, it was me. that's when I realized I needed to correct course, and that's when I realized the errors of my way, and you know, I tried to make amends with all the people that I hurt along the way, right? So um, finally, when I came back, I was like, now I'm going to do it right. And
Mhm.
so my last chef job, that was me like putting it all back together again. So I spent 5 years in my last executive chef job, and it was like the best job I ever had because I wouldn't have been able to succeed had I not failed. I needed to fail because I thought I understood failure. And if you've never really faced failure, you think you know how you'd react, but you don't. Because I had all the ideas of what I would do, and it's so easy, and just do this. And like you look at other people that are struggling, like, why don't they just do this? It's easy. It's like, but you haven't gone through that, so you don't know. Once I had gone through that and I experienced it, I knew what I needed to do, and that's what helped me recover. So
Yeah. I believe it was the other day where you had also written about reputation. It takes such a long time to build, but it only takes minutes, I believe,
yeah,
for it to get teared down, right?
yeah,
Um, and what you said, it was absolutely true because, again, one of the 48 laws of power is to protect your reputation, with your life, essentially, right?
yeah,
Um, I absolutely love that book too. A lot of chefs, in terms of the ego,
hmm,
um, they don't really go back and apologize and try to make amends. They just, you know, w- um, they just go off and be like, okay, you know what? What happened happened. Oh well, if they don't want to stick it out with me, if they don't want to ride with me, that's it. But I think you doing that is absolutely humble. I've also made mistakes in my past where I've tried to make amends with people. Sometimes it happened, sometimes it didn't. The only way to grow is to forgive yourself and to learn from those experiences and try to make yourself a lot better, right? So I look at more towards the Western philosophies, and I don't know if it's more popular than Eastern philosophy because, again, when it comes down to my feed,
stoicism, like Marcus
yeah.
Aurelius, yeah, hmm,
So like Marcus Aurelius, right? Memento mori, and so forth. Um, when I first became a chef, I was horrible. Once I got that title and I got the embroidery, sous chef, and I'm walking around like just trying to, go and throw my weight around. And it wasn't until my brother, who was actually the GM of this restaurant, he kind of put me in my place like pretty quick. Um, just because he was like, hey man, like this is how we're gonna do things here. I'm general manager, blah blah. And so when that had happened, I pretty much flipped the switch and I tried to make everything better. Unfortunately, that restaurant, it didn't work out for me because the damage was already made.
hmm,
And so, I decided to move on from that place and go into a different restaurant and implement new uh the new me in there, and it was so much smoother, so much better. Things were a lot less stressful, just because I had a great dynamic with my team. um, and so one of the things that I, again, always tell not only to people I speak to in my space is that my reputation is my life. And so with the humbleness too, with the whole thing with Memento Mori, is like at any time I can, pass away, and and what legacy did I leave behind, you
right,
know? And
right,
that's the reason why I decided to kind of jump into what you're doing right now, just because I want to leave a lasting legacy of, you know, of Chef Ismael had trained me on this, and had taught me how to cook, but also he taught me how to be a humble person. He also taught me that, mistakes are going to happen. Let's learn from it and let's move forward from it and grow from it, right? And it's the same thing with when it comes down to just everything, my family life. I've always said that, these stars, they're cool and all. Those are my aspirations of eventually getting a Michelin star,
hmm,
but the real goal for me is to leave a legacy of who I am as a chef as well as a human being. And so If I can teach people in the culinary space, then cool. Ideally, I'd love to be, named right next to Augustina Escoffier,
Mhm.
or Thomas Keller. But also, not only do they got those stars, but they also have that humbleness behind them, who are, not only the chef, but also the mentors towards the mentees, and spreading their knowledge and their philosophy, their ideology onto their team and spreading it.
Right.
So that's pretty much what my goal is in terms of where I'm trying to go.
Mhm.
Um, it- I'm not at the level where you were at, and whatsoever, nor was I at the nor am I at the level right now, because I'm a private chef. I'm a caterer. I have a very tiny team. Um, and so, but I still try to implement those philosophies onto my team. That way, because again, this industry is a revolving door. We are going to see new cooks, new front of house,
Mhm.
just go in and out. But what we can do is try to implement what we know onto them, and hopefully they take it in a positive note. When it comes down to business, how important is abstract thinking, especially in the industry where creativity is key, but acumen is just as vital?
Well, I would say this is when you look at really successful people. So if you look at the Steve Jobs, the Elon Musks, anyone that's really been a game changer in their industry, what you'll notice is that they operate as the exception to the rule. So the rule is 99% of the other people in the field, but they are the exception. They're the 1% that think differently. And if you look at chefs, the same thing applies. You look at the Thomas Kellers, Rene Redzepis, the Ferran Adrias, they are the exception to the rule. They make a shift, everyone else shifts. They're not really copying anyone else to a certain degree. Of course, there's techniques and things like that, but them operating as the exception to the rule is really what gets them noticed. Now, in terms of business, you have to be able to think abstractly, to view things from a different perspective. I read a book once, it was How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci. And I found it fascinating how he would study things. He would look at them upside down. He would look at them from different angles, just to see if he would see something by switching up the perspective. And sometimes you have to think, how can you view the problem that you're looking at from a different angle in which no one else views the problem this way. Because when you think different, you end up at a different place. When you think like everyone else, you end up at the exact same place that they ended up. And I'm not saying that there aren't some lessons to be learned with going the traditional route, but I'm saying if you want to be exceptional, you have to think differently. So thinking abstractly really is a superpower. And it's funny because we talked about morning routine. And part of my morning routine for years, let's just say for the last 15 years, I played these Lumosity games where they're like brain puzzles, and I play them for about 15 minutes in the morning while I'm sipping my coffee. And one day it spit out data for me. So it's like, hey, based on all the games that you've played and all the data that we've collected, this is how you think. You think most like someone in scientific engineering, which I thought was interesting. I was like, I don't know why it thinks I think that way, but I guess the way I answer the games that I play, the scores that I have, it says I think like this. And it said I am least like someone that works in the culinary field. And I thought that was very interesting. So it said I had a complete 180 to my industry. Now, what I found most fascinating about that is it said I don't think like chefs. Of all the professions it could have selected, it said I don't think like chefs. And I thought to myself, that's probably why I'm successful, is because I don't think like chefs. I don't view problems through that lens. I view them through a different lens from my own unique perspective, whether it's philosophy or whatever the case may be. And I've noticed that most people, as I look at patterns of successful people, and I like to really get in the minds of people that are successful. Like I said, I read a lot. I read about Alexander the Great because I want to know what made him tick, right?
Mhm.
I'll read about Genghis Khan because I want to know what made him tick. Whatever these great successful people are, these people that have changed the world, I want to see how they thought differently. And what you notice about them is that they every single one of them is not an ordinary person. They all have a very unique way that they see the world.
Yeah, no, definitely. They were definitely tough. That way of thinking, you mentioned like Ferranadria, and then how versus the way you think. Um, those are the type of chefs who will truly, or who are and who have truly changed the way we look at food, the way we think about food, the way we taste food. Um, because I look at restaurants, I think it was in Copenhagen, uh, Alchemist or Alchemy.
Mhm.
Um,
Alchemist, yeah.
yeah, so that restaurant definitely blew my mind when I first saw it, just because of not just the plating of it, but also the way they manipulate the ingredients in order for them to get the end result that they have.
Right.
That to me is absolutely amazing, and I think that, me personally, if we had more restaurants like that here in America,
Mm.
aside from Melania, um, I think that every country, the way they look at food would definitely change.
You
But
have
again,
a problem with that because you have in the European culture, dining is already built into their culture, like
right.
appreciation of dining. You also have this appreciation of art built already ingrained in their culture. Now, it's not that people in the United States don't appreciate dining and art, but it's not as ingrained. There's not as many people in the United States that appreciate dining and art as compared to to most of the European nations. And with that being said, it'd be very difficult to open up a restaurant like that and sustain it. Because if it was easy, you would see a lot more of them. If there was more appreciation for them, if a linea wasn't a unicorn, and it was ordinary because there was a lot of Alineias, it'd be easy because people know we just like this dining experience. We want to sit for 3 hours and experience this this avant-garde cuisine. But because there's not enough there's not enough audience for it, I think that's why you don't see it as much in the United States. And even the top end restaurants in the United States, if we look at the best, very different from the ones in Europe. Like even then, like there's not a lot of restaurants on the level of Noma in terms of in terms of how abstract they are and how different and unique they are. A lot of the top end restaurants in the U.S., not that they're all exactly the same, but they're a little bit more similar, right? Where you could find there's some unicorns in Europe or Asia. It's like there's nothing else like this.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the society needs to have more emphasis on the arts versus here in America, at least? Do we need to have more emphasis on the arts, on music, architecture? Because when I went to New York, one of the things that I noticed were the buildings, right? Almost every single building looked the same. But if you were to go to Spain, you see some of the most beautiful, some of the most majestic buildings built back in the 1500s, 1400s, and so forth. And that's just because they took pride in what they did. Do you think that the United States needs to have more of a artistic culture towards it? Because and again, I'm gonna say this, even though my sister-in-law hates it, but a lot of the abstract art here in the U.S. is not really art.
It's like a banana taped, like a banana taped to the wall.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I'm just like, we veered completely off from what we were in the beginning, right? To now putting a shoe in the middle of the thing here, and then now it's like a multi-million-dollar piece of artwork, right? But how do you feel about that?
Well, it's an interesting conversation that I want to think how I answer this, because I'm not saying that everything to a certain degree is art, right? It's a unique expression of how they want to do it. It's not all good art, right? And it's kind of like in the culinary world, like we express food because we think we're being creative and artistic. So you could take someone with zero skill or minimal skill, let's say. They got to know how to cook a little bit, and they'll create something, and they've created it, and they're passionate, and it's beautiful to them, and they serve it to people that they care about who also appreciate it and say, wow, this is beautiful. Now, the person that created it and the person that they served it to know nothing about culinary at the high level. So to them, it's amazing. And I think we sometimes experience a lot of that. So if our understanding goes up, our appreciation and our expectation also goes up, right? So if we knew more about art, if we knew more about literature, if we knew more about history, we would appreciate those things a little bit more. But we don't. We have short memories. We have TikTok brain. We see what's on. We see what's of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't really appreciate it because we don't know what we're looking at. Now, I had mentioned earlier that I read Leonardo da Vinci, How to Think Like Leonardo da Vinci. And so I became fascinated with Leonardo da Vinci. And I read the biography that was written about him. I think it's just Leonardo. And one of the things that always puzzled me was why the Mona Lisa is such a great, like, why do people consider it one of the greatest paintings ever? Mm-hmm. And I was like, I mean, it looks like any artist today could draw that. That's worth their salt. So I didn't really understand it. But in the book, they talk about the angles of the light and the pupil dilation. And the amount of light that was coming in would dilate the pupil that exact amount. And I want to say, someone will correct me if I'm wrong, that both pupils are dilated differently based on the position of her head. Mm-hmm. And for him to understand that there was such a level of detail in certain things that get lost on all of us because we just see the Mona Lisa. But to the artist, they're like, that's badass, right? He paid attention to the pupils based on the amount of light that was in the photo, or I'm sorry, in the picture that he drew. So they're able to appreciate it at a different level than we are. We're sitting over here. So I think the more we understand it, and it's like, now that I understand why he's a genius, I definitely appreciate him more because I didn't know what I was looking at. So I think there has to be more education to understand what it is that makes good art. It's all art, but let's understand what those technical details are that make it good art. And I think once we understand that, our level of appreciation also goes up with it.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer, actually. I personally think we should have more art in schools. I think that
and it's not just about the art, but it's also understanding, like, hey, what's the allegory behind this photo? Like, what does this convey? Right. So you're looking at it, but what it's supposed to represent? What's the allegory behind it? What emotions is it supposed to evoke? If we understood that, we'd see it for more than just, brush strokes on a piece of canvas.
For the culinary history and evolution, you're someone who appreciates history.
Yep.
And how do you see the evolution of the culinary traditions? Are they any historical chefs at the moment that inspire your own cooking, or that inspired when you were cooking?
Yeah, I mean, the chefs that inspired me the most when I was cooking, I mean, it was a little bit different, but definitely Trotter, definitely Keller, definitely like Jean-Georges, the Mount Rushmore, right? So the American chefs, the Ducasse, the Joel Robuchon, these chefs, really, I was looking at all their books and I would like geek out. What can I take from them? What can I absorb from these great chefs and incorporate into my own style? But even before that, I also had a moment where I was looking at, Le Guide from Escoffier and looking at that and saying, what was he doing? Let me understand some of these recipes. Let me understand the classic repertoire. How do I reincorporate that into what we're doing today? I was a big book nerd when it came to food. So, I definitely respect tradition. I mean, Bernard Loiseau from, the chef who took his own life tragically. But reading about them, the Marco Pierre Whites, White Heat, I have somewhere back here on my bookshelf, one of my favorite books. Understanding what they did was shaping what I did as well. Now, as far as where the industry is going, I don't know, because I don't know if we respect tradition as much as we used to. I think everyone's very much into creating their own path and burn down the Library of Alexandria, right? And I would say that's probably the wrong approach, because the same people that are burning down libraries today and not appreciating it are going to be the same people that are going to get forgotten later, right? So they're going to experience the same thing by the next generation. So I think you have to give credit where credit is due. I like to say, if you had to dig a 10-foot hole and someone else dug 9 feet before you got there, you can't, and you only dug 1 foot, you can't claim that you dug all 10 feet. Like, you have to give credit where credit is due. Someone dug 9 feet for you to finish that last foot. And so you can trash their food and you say, oh, they put parsley on the rim, or look at how bad that looks. Yeah, they had to do all that in order for you to take the next step. They passed you the baton, right? You didn't figure out parsley on the rim. Like, you already knew that was a bad idea, because bad ideas get pruned off, right? So as we're shaping this tree, the bad ideas get pruned off, and the form starts to come together. So I would say people need to pay a little bit more attention to what was done in the past, because it's not all it's not all bathwater. We're throwing it all out, right?
Yeah. So what do you think the next big big evolution in the culinary world is, and how would you stay ahead of the curve if you were still in the game?
Well, I had some ideas about a year ago where I thought it was going. And about a year ago, I would have said it's to be very authentic to yourself. So it's not just about like I'm a Mexican chef. Okay, I'm a Mexican chef from this town. I'm a Mexican chef from this town in this house, and this is how we cooked. So it becomes micro specific to who you are, right? So I think that was the way. How do you tell your particular story through this lens? And that's what I would have said about a year or maybe a year and a half ago. Now I don't know, because it's really difficult to see where it's going, because I feel like we're in turbulent times in the culinary world. I read this article yesterday from the New York Times, how a lot of chefs are leaving the industry. It really resonated with me because I left, and it's like I'm reading someone else's story, and I was like, that's my story. And I don't know what's going to happen, because I feel like the old guard of chefs is being replaced at a rapid pace. Mm-hmm. So you have a lot of new chefs coming in, taking over. Sous chefs are now executive chefs. And they weren't sous chefs for 20 years before they became executive chefs. They were sous chefs for 1 or 2 years. Now they're executive chefs. So you're going to have fresh new ideas, and a lot of history is being lost. And you have rapid prototyping now with AI and Chat GPT, and being able to create images that I don't know. Like, I think being able to predict what is next was a little bit easier a couple of years ago, but as quick as things are moving now, it's like, man, I don't know. I could be completely wrong next year. It could be a throwback to the beginning, or it could be something completely new, because whoever the next Renee is, or the next Ferran, like, we don't know. We didn't see Renee coming. We didn't see Ferran coming when he did. Like, no one before Ferran thought the next trend is, molecular gastronomy. No one before Renee thought the next trend was foraging and fermentation. No one thought that. So whatever the next thing is, I guarantee you, no one sees it coming. And if they do, they need to buy a lottery ticket. So I don't know. It's really difficult. And once quantum computers get involved and become ubiquitous, then it's game over. We'll figure it out from there.
Yeah. In terms of AI, do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing for chefs?
I think it's a great thing. And one of the things, I get a lot of pushback. I love AI. I love using it. It makes my life exponentially more efficient. When I started Chef's PSA, I got to a certain point where I was like, I need to hire 2 or 3 more people to get this done, because there was an immense amount of work with all the writing I had to do, all the emails I had to send, all the responses, all the editing. And once AI came in, I don't need those 3 people anymore, because AI is now my assistant, and I'm very efficient with it. Now, if I was a chef, and a lot of the consulting that I do when I get hired as a consultant, one of the first things, and one of the most common things that I do for people, is I set up AI chatbots for recipe development, for editing menus, for proofreading, to make sure there's no spelling and grammatical errors, to analyze their pricing, to look at the food costs, to create spreadsheets for them. So I'll create this for them. And what it does is it frees up the chefs that were tied up in the office to spend more time in the kitchen. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of chefs are saying, oh, AI it doesn't have soul. And I'm not saying it does. What I'm saying is it's going to allow you to do the best part of your job, which is cooking and spending time with your team. Because if the best part of your job, this is my hot take, if the best part of your job as a chef is staying in the office, avoiding the kitchen, and typing on your computer, then you shouldn't be a chef, period. Like, that shouldn't be the best. That shouldn't be why you're doing it, because you could do that in any other industry. You could be an accountant. You could be an office manager. If the best part of your job is putting stuff in spreadsheets, and the best part of your job is not being in the kitchen with your team, mentoring the next generation, creating food, cooking, making sure you have an exceptional service, then you got a problem. You got to look in the mirror and say, like, you really need to think about this, because AI is coming for your job and it's going to put you back in the kitchen. So a lot of sous chefs right now, especially a couple of years ago when I was still an active chef, a lot of sous chefs would come up to me and be like, "Hey chef, I really want to learn the admin piece. Can you teach me how to write a schedule? Can you teach me how to, how to manage food cost or this, that, and the other?" And I said, "I promise you I could teach you that in about a day. But what you're doing in the kitchen is way more important than what you think is going on in the office." Like, I know you might think writing a schedule is cool. There's nothing cool and fun about writing a schedule. There's nothing cool about getting called into the HR office to mitigate a problem, right? There's nothing fun about that. You're living the most exciting times of your career and you have no idea. It's kind of like when you're a little kid and all your bills are paid, right? And you get to play with your friends and you're like, "I can't wait till I'm an adult." It's like, chill out, kid. Enjoy your time. Enjoy your time as a sous chef. Enjoy your time as a line cook. Because when the time comes, you do give up a lot of that joy of cooking, because it's a compromise. You get more money, you get more responsibility, but sometimes you get sucked away from the kitchen to deal with the BS.
I'm going to make this argument with you.
Please.
So in terms of AI, let's pretend I was never a chef. I am now just opening up a restaurant. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I have AI to my disposal, right? I ask AI, "Hey, AI, I need you to write a menu for Japanese cuisine. I have a budget of, let's say, $100,000 for the month," or whatever it is. "I want it to be fine dining. Create, I don't know, like 15 menu items. Price them out for me, food cost and everything like that. Here's, whatever information. I have this many cooks. I have, this is what they're getting paid, A, B, and C. Manage my schedule. Enter." It gets it all done for you.
Okay.
So while, yes, you do need a chef to teach you how to build the sushi, what's stopping me from hiring someone from, small sushi? Here in Anaheim, there's a place called Kaiba. Sushi experts. They're pretty good. It's a small mom and pop restaurant. But I hired one of, maybe 2 or 3 other cooks, and I take them on in my, and I have them under my restaurant. At that point, why should I hire a chef if I already have AI to do all of that stuff for me?
That's a very good question. And that's a question that the industry is going to be facing very soon, because the second that you realize that a lot of the stuff can become automated and what you need chefs in the kitchen cooking, then one could argue I could create an AI executive chef to handle the executive chef tasks. We're not far off from, because AI, this is the worst it'll ever be. As good as it is today, it's the worst it'll ever be. It's only going to get exponentially better, and it happens rapidly. So then you have to ask yourself, like, do you want a chef? Now, here's what I predict. So maybe I could go back when you asked me what my prediction is in the future. This is not necessarily a food trend prediction, but this is a restaurant trend prediction that I'm going to say might not happen next year, might not happen 2 years from now, but I promise you we'll see it in our lifetime. Is there will be AI-only restaurants where it's robots cooking the food. We're recording today is the 11th. So yesterday, Elon Musk did a bunch of videos where he has the Optimus robot, and they're serving drinks and showing what these robots are going to be able to do. Well, that's going to replace a lot of the cooks in the kitchen eventually. Probably not today, but very soon you'll have robo cooks in the kitchen. You have an AI, chef doing all that, and it'll be very efficient, and you won't need people, and there'll be fewer mistakes. And then you'll have restaurants that are human driven. It's like, okay, we have real people cooking the food created by real people. And I promise you there's going to be a trend of saying, I only support human restaurants. I don't support AI restaurants because I want food cooked by people. I want food with soul. And you'll see a lot of people that say we are an AI free kitchen, right? And I promise you that's going to be something in the future, is that a lot of people are going to say, no, it's an AI only restaurant. I don't eat at AI only restaurants. I only eat at restaurants where there's still humans in the kitchen. And I think that'll be a trend. Maybe not next year, but soon.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I don't know if you've seen, but those that hand called Flippy flips the burgers for you,
Yeah.
right? Um, and then there's another restaurant where it's fully AI automated, I believe in Los Angeles. I don't remember where I saw it, but they they managed to create the first AI restaurant. Secretly, I hope it fails, just because, again, I don't. I'm a traditionalist in terms of food,
Yeah.
and I want fine dining to come back. I want food to be made by humans, thought by humans, and I've said this before, but I like AI. Uh, because sometimes if I'm stuck on a menu, say I'm making sushi for someone, right? Or I have a sushi client
Mhm.
in 2 weeks. I'm doing a sushi bar for them, but they wanted something different from what they can get from other restaurants around their area.
Mhm.
And so I said to myself, okay, well, how can I do this? Or how can I keep my costs low? And then on top of that, keep it traditional as well. So using AI as a source of inspiration
Mhm.
and to be able to, like, okay, pick and choose what I can get from this, because I do have a couple books right here in my library area about sushi, but it's not to a point where um, I feel comfortable enough for me to open it and just be like, okay, well, I'm gonna get this from Jiro. And I feel that what you're saying, we are kind of going towards that. Um, I guess towards that point where AI is going to really take over. But yeah.
I think you can't be and I'm not trying to be I'm not trying to sell you on AI, but you can't take a Luddite approach where it's Google, right? We're not sitting here arguing that Google took our jobs, but it's the next version. It's the evolution of what Google did for chefs. Is it kept us out of the libraries? It helped our research become exponentially more efficient. The only thing right now today that AI is doing is it's helping chefs iterate faster than they could before. It's getting them back into the kitchen, which I personally think is a good thing. Um, and the one thing that AI has, and I work with AI a lot, the one thing that it doesn't have is it doesn't have a chef's soul. And so it does make a lot of mistakes. It thinks this is a good idea, but it can't taste. So it might think this is going to be a good dish, but it doesn't know. So I don't think I don't think chefs need to run away from AI. I think they need to leverage it to make their time much more efficient so they could do the thing that is the most important for a chef, and that is cook and be with your team, mentoring them in the kitchen. So if AI allows you to do that right now, I think that's a beautiful thing. And I think people need to really consider that. Now, the chefs that don't embrace AI need to be careful, because there are a bunch of chefs that do embrace AI who will be more efficient at their job. Now, I think back to a conversation I had with one of my best friends when we were first coming up as executive chefs, and we were complaining about not getting paid as much as the old guys used to get paid. And he had a very wise statement, and he says, what ended up happening is you had young guys like us at the time. You have young guys like us that could still hustle in the kitchen, that were willing to do it for less than those old guys. And we replaced them all. So we moved this old guard out when I was coming up. We moved the old guard out because we would do it for less, because we wanted the title so bad, and we could still move. We still had we weren't all rickety yet. Well, the same thing's going to happen eventually to the current generation. Is they're gonna come in and say, hey, we'll do it for a little bit less or more, maybe, but we'll do it much more efficient because we understand AI, and your current executive chef doesn't. So we're going to fix the problems in the kitchen, because if you spend more time in the kitchen, you realize that's where the problems are. It's not in the office. Most of the problems that need to be addressed can be found when you're in the operation looking for them. They're much easier to find. And I think that's what's going to end up happening, is like the person who could spend more time in the kitchen, mentoring, cooking, developing. You're the best cook in the kitchen, technically, when you're the executive chef. You have the most amount of experience, knowledge, palate. If you could spend more time with your team, you make that kitchen exponentially better, more efficient. Mentor more people. They get to their destination much more rapidly. AI can help you do that, because you don't have to spend what used to be 6 hours in the office doing administrative tasks, might only be 2 now. Now, it doesn't mean that it's going away completely, but it does mean that you're just going to be much more efficient at it, right? There's also the flip side, because people that love being in the office will just use AI to give them more administrative work, right? So they'll just say, well, now that I have all this extra time, let me do more administrative projects. Let me start working on all these other things. Let me write all these SOPs and training manuals that I didn't have time to write, that I'm much more efficient at now. So we'll see how it plays out. But I'll tell you, most of the people that I consult with, and that I teach them how to use AI to write recipes, if anything, it's made their operations exponentially more efficient, and it hasn't made ownership say we should replace them with a robot. We haven't got there yet.
It's crazy how AI is taking over the world, man. Very crazy.
Hopefully Terminators stay away. Hope the answers have been thoughtful so far.
Yeah, no, definitely they have been. I have one more culinary question, and then we're going to go into the fun questions.
Sure.
So in the fine dining world, it's constantly evolving. Has been a lot of discussion lately about whether the traditional model, expensive tasting menus, exclusivity, the formal dining experiences are becoming outdated. What's your take on this shift? Is there still a place for that kind of dining experience in today's more casual, accessible food scene?
Yes, I do think it's evolving. When I was a chef, we had the last job. Also, I'll use that as an example. We had Garrison Restaurant, which was fine dining, and we had a tasting menu for a while, and we also did a la carte. So we did both. You could get the tasting menu, you could get the a la carte menu, and we really enjoyed making the tasting menu food. Like, it's just beautiful. As a chef, I think one of the most amazing things with fine dining is it's the highest form of expression, because you could express technique. Very detailed technique, which, for the craftsman, it's like, okay, you can geek out on that. You could express yourself creatively with the food, and then ideally it's delicious, right? So you can't always express that with all levels of dining. Like, you can't get hyper meticulous in all areas, where fine dining, I think, does lend itself very well to that. The problem with it is I found myself enjoying cooking the food much more than I enjoyed eating the food. So we'd look at all this beautiful food with tweezers and flowers and, plushes of whatever. And then I'd say, that looks really pretty. And then I'd go eat a steak. Like, I don't want to eat it. I just like cooking it. And I realized as a chef, there's a little bit of a disconnect here with me knowing that I got to be careful how I say this, because I don't want people, like, I'm being hyperbolic. Me looking at that food, knowing it's just kind of BS. It's just for the ego. It's just for the people but I don't want to eat it myself. So this is something that I struggled with internally, is when I go to a restaurant, I don't want 20 courses. I don't want to eat that way. I can't eat that much food. I mean, I went to a restaurant the other day, and I split the entree and only ate half my salad, and I was full. I couldn't order dessert. So I can't eat that way. So I think with fine dining, there's a lot of it that is a chef needs to add value, and they need to express the amount of technique. They need to have a certain level of service and luxury, and the stemware and the flatware and the plateware all needs to be very, very, very beautiful and elegant, or handcrafted, whatever the case may be. But I find myself not wanting to eat that way all the time. If anything, never. Right? I mean, really, like, if you took me to one of the best restaurants in the world, fill in the blank, and it was 20 courses, I'd probably be tapped out after my fourth course. Like, I just can't eat that way. And I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one in that category, right? So I think the evolution of fine dining, my personal, like, I have a magic wand, and I'm gonna direct the course of all dining, as I think we could still do the elements of luxury. We could still have the tableside gueridon. We could still do the intricately plated food. I just don't think it needs to be as much. I think we could pull down, because I think one of the biggest things that's missed is I want to feel good when it's done. I want to go home. I don't want to feel sick. I don't want to have to spend the entire night in the bathroom. I want to feel like, hey, I enjoyed myself. I feel satisfied, to the point of satisfaction, not to the point of gluttony and overindulgence. And that's a very specific point when it's just too much.
Right.
I think if we could look at that, and you look at what 11 Madison Park did, and they reduced the amount of courses that they had, and they introduced more vegetarian items to make it lighter. I think there's, I mean, I'm sure there was a food cost incentive there too, but that's a different conversation. But I think what they did was brilliant, because they said we could make the experience just as good, but it doesn't need to be as long. We could make it 2 hours, right? A 2-hour dinner is just as memorable as a 4-hour dinner. If anything, when you start creeping into the third and fourth hour, it's like, I want to go already. You know what I mean? So how do you make the fine dining experience more modernized to today's attention span and to the way that the way that we eat now? So the attention span is much shorter because we have social media brain, TikTok brain. So we don't want to be at the table without looking at our phone and responding to texts. We don't want to be there for 4 hours. So let's reduce that a little bit. Maybe it's 3 hours. Maybe it's 2 hours. Maybe it's not 20 courses. Maybe it's 6, right? And maybe it's 5. And then I think then you can reinvent fine dining. And what ends up doing with that is you reduce the labor costs in the kitchen, right? So you avoid a lot of the unpaid stage conversation, right? You don't need 100 cooks. It becomes a little bit more sustainable, right? Not just in terms of human resources, meaning people in the kitchen, but also sustainable in the terms of food waste, right? You're not wasting as much food because you probably are throwing away the last 5 courses because they're barely touching it, whatever the case may be. So I think we just got to rethink this through. I'm not saying that what I just said is the only answer and it's the right answer, but what I am saying is that the conversation is being had. And I think it's important that the conversation is being had. And I think what 11 Madison Park really started the conversation of redefining what does the fine dining experience look like in 2024 going into 2025. And I don't know if it looks exactly like it did 10 years ago when you were doing the 40-course tasting menus with little bites and 4 or 5 hours. Like I don't know if that's it anymore.
Yeah. No, the game has really changed a lot. I'm seeing a lot more food trucks. I'm seeing a lot more street vendors. I'm seeing a lot more, catering, a lot more private chefs now. And that's just because I think people want more of that creative freedom, but also want to be able to make more for themselves and their families financially. And on top of that, like, I'm not going to lie, me as a business owner, private chef and caterer, I have so much more time to myself, as well as more time dedicated to my family. But with that being said, business and working at a restaurant is two completely different things. One thing that I listened to, I'm not sure if you listen to him either, but Andy Frisella, and he talks about business. He's got this thing called the MFCEO project, and he goes into talking about how running a business and working for a business are two different things, because at the end of the day, you can understand how to cook, you can understand all the lingo and everything like that, but when you leave that space and now you're running your own business with your own capital, with your own equipment, with your own team, then it becomes a different beast, because not only are you doing that, but you also have to market it. You have to market your business. You have to market yourself. And with the social media trend, now you're competing against millions of other chefs who are on that space as well.
Right.
How did you navigate through that, from being a chef and running a business all the way to now you're doing content creation and you're running that type of business? How is that differentiated between, how are those two things different for you? And I guess I see you as a successful business owner in terms of Chef's PSA right now, because you're in that space right now. But how did you, I guess, make that a successful business model versus what you've done in the past, as far as owning? You said you owned a restaurant as well, right? So
that was my partner. It wasn't my money. It was someone else's money. They just gave me the game. Yeah. One of the things that when it comes to running your own business is the ships are burned, right? If you fail, it's on you. There's no one coming to save you. So there's a little bit more urgency to get things done. Like I said, I work 7 days a week now, and there's different aspects of the business. There's the books, there's there's clothing, there's podcasting, there's sponsorship. Like, there's a lot of moving parts that I have to. There's mentorship, right? There's public speaking. There's a lot of moving parts that I have my finger on the pulse on, and I have to check daily. But what I will say is that the work ethic that I got when I was a chef translated very well to being entrepreneurial now. And I would say that one of the things that I would say for me in particularly is that I understand my audience, and I speak the same language. I have experience. I'm not a civilian, right? I'm a chef. I'm a chef, and I did it for quite a long time, and I understand the ups and downs and the struggles. And maybe it was a few years ago, but it hasn't really changed that much. The same struggles that cooks are facing today are the same ones that I've faced, or chefs, and so on and so forth. So being able to relate and coming from a point of experience, like I'm not just talking because I think this works or this might work. I've proved it. This works. So I think in order to be successful at something, you'll see a lot of people jump into the space and don't realize how hard it is. Like, I'll use the podcasting world, for example, is people say, oh, I want to create a podcast. And you'll see that it's like, what people don't know in my world is like, well, it's hard. The first podcast is easy. The second podcast is easy. But when I'm on episode right now in Chef's PSA, I'm on episode 126. So I'm going to record solo on the next one. And I'm like, what am I going to talk about? I don't know. Like it was easy. Episodes 1 through 10, food critics, hiring, firing. It's like, okay, now what? What can I talk about next week that I haven't talked about already? So it's really easy when you're only doing a few episodes and you only have a little bit of experience as a chef. But I wouldn't be able to continue down to episode 126 if I didn't have 27 years of experience and stories and history and ups and downs that I could pull from. So I do think that there is a little bit of know-how that has to go into it, because it's really easy at first, and then you hit a wall. And then you hit a plateau, and it's like, how do you overcome it? How do you reinvent yourself? Are you adding a little bit more to every episode? If you listen to my first episodes, like the audio is bad, the editing is bad. I've gotten better at editing the thumbnails, and I'm just constantly evolving it as I learn. I improve the business, and eventually, hopefully, I look back on this and it's like, oh man, I can't believe I said that, or I can't believe the audio was so bad or it looked so bad. But the only way to get good at something is through repetition. The same thing applies in cooking. And I would say for anyone that wants to go down this road of starting a business, whether it's a restaurant or content creation, whatever this media company, whatever it may be, if you want to go down this road, start. Because a lot of people want to do it, but they think I'll do it when I get better, when I get the right this, when I get the right that. Like, who cares? Just start. Start from something so you could start, because you're going to make all these mistakes anyway when you buy all this stuff, or when you get, like, you're still going to make the same mistakes because you don't know what you don't know. Jumping in and just doing it, you'll figure it out, because we all start as a beginner in anything any endeavor that we begin. So start. Like, get off of zero is probably the most important advice I can give you. Get off of zero, learn from your mistakes quickly.
Awesome. All right. I have a couple quick questions. Greatest UFC fighter of all time?
Greatest of all time. Oh, that's tough. I would have to say, I'm going to go way back. I'm going to say Royce Gracie, because without him, there is no UFC. Without him, and I wouldn't say like he could beat everyone. I'm not delusional. I think today's fighters would smoke him in today's life. But without him, the pioneer, right? There is no Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. There is no UFC. There is no small guy beating the big guy, understanding technique, really innovating, like change the game. He is the Auguste Escoffier of the UFC.
Yeah, no, for sure. I was watching, man, what the heck was his name? Not Dan Henderson, the American guy who went to Japan. And what was his name?
Randy Couture?
No, older, mustache, tough.
Oh, Don Fry.
Don Fry.
Yeah.
And I saw an interview about how he said that today's fighters, they're not fighters, I guess that they're
athletes.
Huh?
They're athletes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm just like, oh man, that's kind of true because the amount of rules that we have now, it's just to keep them safe too, obviously, right? But um, fighting back then was so much tougher. It just,
Yeah, it was
um,
tough because we didn't know what was going to happen. Like now, you know when you're getting into it, you've seen enough fights. Like I know what I'm getting myself into. Back then, you had no idea. Like, am I going to die? Like,
yeah, yeah.
they didn't know. It was like, is my eye going to get knocked out of my brain? You
It
know,
was
shove my nose bone into my brain and I'm going to die. Like you didn't know what was going to happen.
it was
Now,
literally kumite,
yeah, yeah,
literally a
it
kumite.
was blood sport, yeah.
Um, so hip hop, I've seen a lot of videos where you talk about hip hop. I know you love Wu-Tang Clan. There's a bunch of other East Coast rappers that you enjoy listening to.
Mhm.
But I rarely hear, well, from my opinion, from what I've seen so far, I haven't really heard anything about the West Coast. Do you have beef against the West Coast?
No, not at all. I love West Coast hip hop also. Growing up, my first introduction to West Coast hip hop was NWA. Like it was an Easy E. I was like in fourth grade, and my brother had a mixtape that he brought from LA. And it was Easy E and NWA, and it was like Dope Man and Boys in the Hood. And I was like, what is this? Like they're saying bad words on the songs. Like we had never heard it before. So like before that, it was like Run DMC I was listening to, or Beastie Boys and stuff like that. But when I first heard NWA, I was like, this is it. Change the game. I'm a huge Easy E fan. Like I used to have, I could sing along with a lot of the Easy E songs. So Snoop, Dre, The Chronic was one of my favorite albums. Even the Doggy Style was also one of my favorite albums. Huge Snoop fan. Trying to think. Too Short when he was doing, whatever he was doing up in Oakland. And then there was a period where there was like Hispanic rappers too coming out of California, like Cypress Hill. One of my favorite groups of all time is Cypress Hill. And then, back in the day, I used to go to the lowrider car shows when I was a youth. So I would, they'd have the Mexican rappers on stage, and I would jam out to them from LA. So I do like West Coast rap. I don't listen to it as much anymore, but I have a huge appreciation. Like when I'm by myself and I'm listening to my mix that I've curated for myself, there's a lot of Easy E in there.
So one thing that I always tell my cousin, because my cousin, he was a DJ back in the 90s, and he did a lot of those house parties out in LA, and Anaheim and those areas. One thing I've always said about Eazy-E is that he's a halvesies. He went from LA to Florida. So, I mean, yeah, I like him, but I probably would put him on my top 5 in terms of like the greatest rappers of all time. But I mean, yeah, NWA was such a great group, which, definitely did inspire groups like D12 and, other groups moving forward, G Unit, right? But yeah, no, I think that they definitely were pioneers, but he was the one who really elevated rap to a whole new level.
Yeah, he brought gangster rap and made it. He was the first gangster rapper that everyone knew who he was.
Yeah,
like everyone knew who Eazy-E was. He was the first gangster rapper that he was a household name.
Tell me about the MIT thing.
So I had mentioned earlier that I play these Lumosity games, right? And so I got an email asking me to be a part of the United States Memory Championships. And I was like, if you know me, I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. Like I don't shy away from any competition. If someone says, hey, you want to fight outside, I'll be like, yeah, I'll do it. Like I might lose, but yeah, fuck it, let's go. So I like competition. By the way, I'm joking about the fight. Like I don't want people coming up to me and challenging me. But I like to compete. If you said let's race shucking an oyster or making risotto, or I don't care if I'm going to win or I just I love the thrill of competition. Win or lose, I could care less. It's about there's a certain feeling you get as a competitor. So I said I'll do this MIT United States Memory Championship. So there's 200 competitors. Because of how well I do on Lumosity, I got invited. I'm in the top 99th percentile of people that use the game. So I get this invite. I go to the MIT US Memory Championships. There's 200 competitors. I end up placing 8th, right? I didn't practice. And I was like, holy shit. But, I understood. I'm good at preparing. So I understood how memory champions prepare for those things. So I went in like very little preparation and I placed 8th. And I was like, I lost to like some, 9-year-old kid from MIT, but it was fun to go in there and compete, like memorize these 200 words. Like, okay. That's the story behind it. If nothing else, how many people do you know that placed 8th in the United States Memory Championship? So it's like one of those things like I could put on my resume.
Only you. Yeah. I think we're gonna leave it at that. Where can we find you?
Chef's PSA everywhere. So Chef's PSA, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Spotify, anything. If you search Chef's PSA, anything except Snapchat, I'm there.
Okay, awesome. And then any last words of wisdoms you'd like to share?
Yes. So if you're going to be a chef and you're going to be in this industry, I think you have a responsibility. And I think this is really important. This is what I'm all about. I think if you're going to be a chef and you're going to be in this industry, you have a duty to lift up the next generation after you. So if one thing you could remember is like, be the type of chef that you needed when you were a cook coming up. So for the chefs that are listening, be that chef that you needed for the next generation coming up.
Awesome. Well, Andre, I sincerely appreciate you coming on to this.
Yeah, it's my pleasure for having me on.
Yeah, and I sincerely appreciate everything you're doing with your platform and teaching people the in and out of what it is to be a chef, how to be a good mentee and a mentor.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I do hope that we get to have a part 2 of this conversation in the future. So
definitely have to. It'd be fun.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, and I will catch you later.
I'm sure we're logging off now, but I hope it went well. And let me know. Thank you for everything.
All right, man. Thank you.
Take care. Bye.